Hello, my name is John Smithin, and I'm the Executive Co-Director and a Fellow of the Aurora Philosophy Institute here in Aurora, Ontario, Canada. Today I'd like to introduce Daniel Johnson, who is a master's candidate in journalism at the former Ryerson University in Toronto. The school year hasn't started yet, so we don't actually know what the new name of the institution is going to be. Daniel is also an intern at the National Post newspaper. So I think what's going to happen today is that Daniel is going to ask me some questions about so-called modern monetary theory, or MMT. Now, at the API, we've done a fair amount of work on this topic. For example, Professor Graham Hubbs, who's the chair of philosophy at the University of Idaho, gave a talk about this last year in the context of politics, radical politics actually, in the United States. Also, I've given talks, more than one talk, on the philosophy of money and finance. Anyhow, you can look up all this material on our website, which is www.theapi.ca, www.theapi.ca, and also there are a number of videos on our YouTube channel, and I hope this video that we're making now will also be up on the YouTube channel. So, so Daniel, I'm going to turn it over to you now to conduct the interview, I suppose. And what's your interest in this particular topic, modern monetary theory?
John, thanks so much for that introduction there. My interest in modern monetary theory kind of started as I read Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth. And then this school year, I'll be doing a major research project on modern monetary theory. So just kind of before we start our discussion, let's just ground it in something that you've spoken about kind of at length at the API. And that is, what is money and how would you define that?
Yeah. I mean, that's important. It's what a philosopher would call the ontology of money. You know, exactly what is this thing called money. And Graham actually talked about that in the talk that I mentioned. As I say, he pointed out that that it came to prominence, MMT, as I say, in the United States a couple of years ago in the context of the policy debate in the US, and has been prominent ever since. Graham's argument is that what the protagonists, the people on both sides, the people who say this is a great thing, a panacea, and the people who say, oh, no, it's going to lead to inflation or whatever it's supposed to lead to, what they were arguing about was not so much the issues, but precisely this question of the ontology of money. It was a dispute about what money really is. And the best way I can put it is that the conventional economic theory has always argued that money is a medium of exchange. It's there to, help trade. It's a substitute for, barter and so forth. And money, they tend to think of it as a thing, like it's like a gold coin or even a piece of paper or something like that. And so on. Well, what a number of philosophers and social scientists generally have been arguing is this isn't really true. What money is, ultimately, I just written a book called Beyond Barter, right? So you get the picture. So money is not a medium of exchange. What money is a relationship of indebtedness between people. It's Jeff Ingham called it a social relation. It's a social relationship. And money is effectively what you pay your debts with. Those debts can be involved in trading. You could pay, not pay till, 2022 or whatever the next, I lose track of the years the older I get. Don't pay till 2022 or whatever the thing is, right? But that's what it is. It's a social relationship, a relationship of debt. I think it's important also to ask. Well, I'm going to ask you the question, like, okay, so as a practical matter, forget all this philosophy stuff. What actually is money? Like, if you were to transfer money to me, how would this be done precisely?
Yeah, in a practical situation, if I were to transfer you money, I would probably do it electronically, through a banking app on my phone.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, money isn't paper or coins or anything like that, right? You're just transferring from your bank account, right? Whatever you bank with. In Canada, you might bank with the Bank of Montreal or something, to my bank account. That's what it is, and the the numbers just go from your account in Bank of Montreal to my account in the Royal Bank or whatever it happens to be. What does that tell you? It tells you that money is some subset of bank deposits, right? That's what
Right.
it is. It's not a piece of paper. I mean, we still keep, we might have a dollar. We don't have dollar bills anymore. We might have like $5, and we might pay for a cup of coffee. But all substantial transactions, right, are done in that way. So what actually is money? It's some subset of the liabilities side of a bank. Right? That's true of the state's money. Their so-called base money. There's a central bank, the Bank of Canada. That's also a bank. And the Bank of Canada, the Bank of Montreal, all these banks, they have balance sheets. On the one side is liabilities, and some subset of those liabilities count as money. On the other side of the bank balance sheet, assets. What's an asset to a bank? Well, it's a loan in some sense. Like the bank will make you a loan in various ways. I mean, they give you a straight loan, or they could buy a security or something like that. Um, and what does that tell you? It tells you that if you or I to have money to trade amongst ourselves, the bank must have lent money to somebody else. Assets equals liabilities, right? Therefore, if we are to have money to do whatever with to pay for social programs, someone somewhere must have been willing to go into debt. So money emerges as a byproduct of debt creation or credit creation.
Yeah, I think you're kind of touching on this a little bit, and this is my next question.
Yeah,
So, with that definition in place of what money is,
yeah.
maybe you could talk a little bit about the methods of money creation.
Again, there are sort of two tiers of the banking system, if you will. The central bank, the government central bank, and the so-called base money of the system, is the liabilities of the Bank of Canada. That's what we mean by Canadian dollar, right? The next tier is the commercial banking system in Canada. Those banks we mentioned, Bank of Montreal, Royal Bank, and so on and so forth, and their liabilities, also count as money. And obviously, in order for the commercial banks to operate, they use Bank of Canada money amongst themselves. Like, for the Bank of Montreal to settle a debt with the Royal Bank, the only thing they've got to transfer is Bank of Canada money. And so the Bank of Canada controls monetary policy, specifically interest rates, the policy of the interest rate, because of that relationship, the relationship between the commercial banks have with the Bank of Canada. So the process is the same. If the Bank of Canada, wants to create more money, they will lend, in effect, some money. For example, and this is the MMT proposition, they will buy up the debt of their own government. People call that creating money from nowhere, pushing a button. It's not really true. It arises from a bunch of social relationships. Social relationships are not nothing. they're real in and of themselves. But did that answer the question, or?
Yeah, I think it does. And then once again, you're kind of getting into the next one here,
Yeah.
which is I'd just like to ask you a little bit about what you call the logically unassailable proposition of modern monetary theory. Maybe a little bit about what that is, and then maybe a little bit about how you depart from some of the core MMT thinking on this.
Yes, and I mean, I basically sort of agree with them on a number of things. It's, as I say, that logical core proposition. Remember, we've sort of established what money is. I mean, in effect, the Canadian dollar is the property of the Bank of the Government of Canada, right? So what's the logical core argument of MMT? What I call the logically unassailable proposition is that the central government in our country, the federal government of an economy with its own sovereign currency, and here's an important point, and a floating exchange rate which floats with the rest of the world, to which I would also add a fixed but adjustable exchange rate, faces no binding financial constraint. So all these questions about where is the money coming from, like can we afford to spend on such and such a thing, are simply false. Like a government can never go bankrupt. All they would do is make some more loans. And then some money results. So when you hear a politician saying, "Oh, we cannot afford to pay some," this is the essence of the MMT. That's not true. They face no binding financial constraints. Now, notice that this does not apply to an individual province or a state within a federal union. I'm going to ask you, can you think the reason why it doesn't apply? Why doesn't it apply to Ontario, for example?
Yeah, I guess that would not apply to Ontario because Ontario is not a currency issuer and they don't have sovereign control over their currency.
Exactly. They use the Canadian dollar, like from their point of view, almost like a foreign currency, right? And it does not apply to jurisdictions which have a irrevocably fixed exchange rate. There is an exchange rate, if our exchange rate was fixed to the US dollar, which it's not. The Canadian dollar changes every day. If we fixed our currency to the US dollar, which some people advocate, then we would simply be a province or another state of the United States. Like it would be the US federal government which would have this power, not ourselves. And of course, it doesn't apply, and this is a crucial thing in the modern world, doesn't apply to all those countries that are embedded in a currency union, such as the European Union in Europe. France, Italy, Spain, Greece, they're effectively simply provinces, of this European Union. And they do face a problem. We've heard a lot of discussion about Greece, for example, have we not? Over the last, well, it seems quite recently for me. To you, it's probably most of your lifetime. But we've heard problems about Greece. Well, the point is that the Greeks do not have a drachma anymore. They are cash strapped because they have to use the euro, which is not controlled by them. It's controlled by the European Central Bank. So that's a key point. So we do. It is important. Now, as far as I'm concerned, for Canada and for the United States, where all this stuff started, of course, they do have a floating exchange rate, do have a floating currency. So there, talk about unsustainable budget deficits and so on and so forth. How we're going to balance the budget just does not make sense. That is true in Canada. It's true in the United States, and we've seen it, have we not? During the response to COVID.
Right.
Obviously, in a sense, the big economic crisis has been caused by COVID, by the pandemic. Economies have been shut down, and rightly, at least in principle, the government has said, well, we can't just leave it like this. We can't just shut the economy down and leave people without money. There are all sorts of relief schemes. At one point, people got checks for $2,000 or something like that. That kind of thing. All sorts of programs, if you will, to try to promote recovery. And it's not paid for by taxes, right? It's paid for by borrowing. You don't pay taxes until the end of the year.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah,
Go ahead.
and so that's yeah, and so that is that's the point. And the MMT people, as I say, that's logically unassailable. Now, I think the difficulty comes is, sure, we've got the money, but you still have to decide, are we spending the money sensibly or not? That's the key issue. You know, for example, the MMT people are very much in favour of the so-called Green New Deal in the United States, and they say, yeah, we can afford to spend money on the Green New Deal. Of course they can. The question is that Green New Deal a good thing in and of itself? Right? Uh, you know, people say, oh, on the one hand we have to pay for healthcare, and on the other hand we have to pay for I don't know what for an army or for defence or something like that, right? And they say, oh, if what we spend on the army we can't spend on healthcare and vice versa. Well, again, that doesn't make sense. You can because you control the money, you can find money to pay for whatever you want, right? Um, the key issue is healthcare a good thing? And you know, are what we're spending is it are we spending it in the right areas, etc., etc. It's the debate about the issues themselves. B, is the defence force doing a good job, or is it efficient, or do we need it? That's the debate. Not we can't afford this, we can't afford that. The question is, what we can always find the money. We should spend it wisely. You see the point I'm making? Is that clear? I mean,
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely clear. You mentioned taxes in there.
yeah,
And then, so I just like to kind of hone in on that. So, from
yeah.
your perspective, what is the role of taxes? And then, you know, maybe where do you differ about, you know, some of the more conventional thinking in this area?
Yes. Well, I mean, obviously, this notion of budget of the balanced budget is the idea is that we spend some money, and in some sense, it has to be paid for, almost like a individual household, right? But we just explained that the process of creating money doesn't involve taxes at all, right? The central bank will make some loans, or the commercial bank will make some loans. The money's created on the other side, and you spend it. So the idea that taxes pay for um, government spending. Now, of course, this is in the sovereign economy. This is in the federal government. It doesn't apply to Ontario. You know, the normal logic does apply. You know, in Ontario. So what are the point of taxes? Well, what the MMT people have argued, and I agree with them on this point, is that the role of taxes is not to pay for government spending; it's to create demand for the government money. You know, you might say, okay, the government is creating all this money. Why should anyone accept it? You know, why should I accept Canadian dollars in exchange for whatever I do or whatever you do? Well, the answer is very simple. You're Daniel Johnson, you're a Canadian citizen, right? The government has the power to tax, and it can tell you, oh, Mr. Johnson, you know, just by mere existence, you owe me money, right?
Yeah.
Um, if you owned a house, for example, you know, you'd have to pay property tax or whatever, right? Um, so the point is, Daniel Johnson, how are you going to get Canadian dollars?
Well, I'm going to have to work for Canadian dollars, I guess.
Precisely. And it creates a demand for Canadian dollars, and it creates a demand for you to, you know, go out and work and get those Canadian dollars. The purpose of it is you need it to satisfy your tax obligation. That's the sense, and you know, taxes drive money is what the MMT people say, and I think that's a very very good insight. You know, so what does that imply? It implies a couple of things. It implies, yeah, there must be taxes. You know, if the government didn't have the power to tax, the whole system would break down, right? And we would be literally back to sort of barter exchange and subsistence farming or whatever we would be back to. But number two, the taxes don't have to be all that large, right? It could work. They could just say, okay, pay me $5,000 a year. That's it. And the spending is not conditional on the taxes, for the reasons that we've just said.
Right.
And so what it boils down to then is that I don't think there's any way out of that logic. Now, you could criticize the MMT people for saying, okay, suppose we do print all this money, will it cause inflation, for example? It may or may not. We'd have to discuss details of economic theory. Yeah, will it have bad effects here, bad effects there, right? But the basic idea of can we afford it just simply doesn't exist. Then most of the policy debates come about two things, as I say. They come about is the policy a good thing in and of itself, right? Is the Green New Deal good per se? And different people can have different opinions on that. The second point and that's where the debate should be about. The second point is, at least I think so, is most of these difficulties about inflation and so forth can actually be finessed by various macroeconomic policies. As you know, my main policy prescription is a zero real policy rate of interest. I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that.
Right. We'll get there. But one thing you did mention is just on inflation. So this may be another area where you depart from some of the core MMT thinking on this. But what do you think about using inflation as a fiscal anchor?
Well, there is a difference. This is a matter of technical economic theory. Bottom line is the MMT people are interested in what they call full employment on the one hand, right? Everyone should have a job, right? But they're also equally interested, somewhat similar to this sort of so-called neoclassical economists or orthodox economics, in price stability, right? Now, price stability would literally be zero inflation, right? And so therefore they put in part of their policy package. They put in a number of, how can I put it, hedges against inflation. And from their point of view, MMT's point of view, raising taxes is not to pay for government spending. They have that thing down perfectly well. But they would raise taxes in order to take money out of the economy and to dampen down demand, obviously kick more money in. And so in their view, if you increase taxes, so in a sense, you're getting back to balancing the budget again. Not literally balancing the budget, but you're increasing taxes. Well, I personally don't think that needs to be done, like the raising of taxes. I would go further. I would say that actually an increase in taxes is more likely to cause inflation, not cure it. And again, obviously, we get into a debate about economic theory and the rights and wrongs of economic theory. But in principle, I think that I'm sort of less interested, actually, in worrying about inflation. In my view, suppose we want to do a program of government spending for the purposes of improving the economy. We mentioned COVID relief, for example. We will need to get the economy moving again after the COVID kind of shutdown or lockdown. Yeah, well, an appropriate way to do that is by various government programs, various spending. It doesn't have to be government, by the way. It could be the private sector. It could be consumers maxing out their credit cards, right? The proposition is someone somewhere has to go into debt. It doesn't necessarily have to be the government, but if the government, if the other people aren't doing it, if the firms aren't investing or if the foreigners aren't buying our stuff or whatever, then it's entirely appropriate for the government to create, some of that demand. My view about that is that, yeah, okay, so that may well increase inflation. The inflation might be 2% today, and it might be 3% tomorrow, or 4% tomorrow, but it's not going to spiral out of control. That's the key point. I think both MMT and the orthodox or neoclassical people, do worry that inflation could spiral out of control. My argument is, yeah, you'll get some more inflation. By the way, you won't always get more inflation. In some scenarios, the inflation rate will actually go down. It's not a given. But suppose you do improve the economy, and suppose the inflation rate rises as a result, then the situation does not have to get out of control. In our actual world that we're in, yeah, it could get out of control, but it does not have to get out of control. And the reason to, as I say, for it not to get out of control, you would have to put in my zero real policy rate, or zero real policy rate of interest, as opposed to the MMT's idea of a zero interest rate policy. And maybe we discuss the differences, between those two things.
Yeah, and then so that's another area where you kind of depart from the core MMT crowd. They suggest a zero interest rate policy, or ZIRP, where you suggest a zero real policy rate of interest, ZRPR. I was just wondering if you could walk us through a little bit about the main differences between those two, and then why you favor the ZRPR.
Yes. Yeah. Z, you say. It should be Z. I must insist on that. Okay, so it's again a question of ontology. Using the fancy word ontology, we said, right at the beginning, we said we have to think about what money is. It's not some kind of magical thing. It's not, we worked out that what money is like the dollars in your bank account. That's what money is, right? And they don't even have a physical existence. They're just, I don't know, electronic impulses or whatever it is that, that they are. It's the same thing with interest rate. First of all, which interest rate are we talking about?
I was just wondering if you could highlight the differences.
No, not talk about the difference between ZRPR or ZIRP. I'm asking the question, which specific interest rate are we talking about? There are mortgage rates, there are, long-term bond rates. There are all kinds of different interest rates. Which one are we talking about before we get into the details?
The policy rate set by the Bank of Canada?
Yes, precisely. Yeah, that's exactly the point. So all of these debates are about what the Bank of Canada should do in terms of its monetary policy. Its monetary policy does not consist of thinking about how many dollars to kick in. It consists of setting the interest rate. And then people will decide how many dollars they're going to borrow, depending on the interest rate, effectively, right? That's what happens. The core interest rate in any economy is what's known as the policy rate of the central bank. It's a very short interest rate, and it's when you look at the news, when people like you tell me that the Bank of Canada raises interest rates or whatever, that's the rate that we're talking about, the policy rate of the central bank. What it is the interest rate which is paid between commercial banks in the overnight market. And effectively, the Bank of Canada can control that rate. And that's the policy rate. And then that affects all of the other interest rates in the economy. Now, we also have to distinguish between so-called, nominal versus real interest rates. The nominal interest rate is just the interest rate itself, the interest rate that you're actually charged. So if we talk about the Bank of Canada's rate, did you look it up on the website this morning?
No, I didn't check it this morning.
No, exactly. Well, it'll be something like close to zero,
Yeah.
which is exactly, and it has been, for years now, right? I don't know it might be 0.25 or whatever the thing is. In the United States, the so-called federal funds rate, which is equivalent, is like point is a tenth of 1%, is so effectively zero, right? And that's precisely what MMT thinks should happen. Now, it's effectively, although the authorities are, probably haven't, learned their MMT, they're effectively, basically the zero interest rate policy is that policy rate should be zero in and of itself. The difficulty with that is that that's not the, how can I put it? It's not the so-called real interest rate. What's the real interest rate? The real interest rate is the nominal interest rate itself, minus the inflation rate. It's what you kind of actually pay in a certain sense for borrowing. Just to take our example, just to take that United States example, right now, as I say, it's 1/10 of 1%, effectively zero, the federal funds rate. The inflation rate we learn, and this is old figures now, has gone up to 5.4%. So what does that tell you? It tells you that effectively they're paying you to borrow money. You can borrow as much as you want, if you have, good credit and so forth, which you and I probably don't have, but there are a bunch of people out there who do. And you can buy up every house in the country and not lose by it. The real rate of interest is negative. If the inflation rate goes up still further, it may go up to 7%, 10%. The inflation rate's rising all the time as we speak, right? So the real interest rate will go lower and lower. It's not a recipe for stability. My alternative proposal, which is the zero real policy rate, is quite simple when you get away from all the jargon, is that you should adjust the policy rate according to what the inflation rate was in the last period. So again, if you take that 0 versus 5.4% inflation, it shouldn't be zero. If the inflation rate has gone up to 5.4%, you should raise the interest rate to 5.4%. This is what I mean. If you do that, you're not get. Now, understand it. It sounds like a high 5.4 would sound like a high rate of interest, and to today's central bankers, they would panic. They would go crazy. But actually, in real terms, it is still zero. That minus the inflation rate is still zero. And what that would do is it would prevent this dramatic instability. If we do these MMT policies on the current procedure, yes, that's why we've got inflation right now. That's precisely why we've got inflation right now. In order to still keep the whole thing going, still keep all the programs going, still recover the economy, and yes, you will still have some inflation, and still no one's making any money from interest rates. The real return is still zero, right? If the policy rate is 5.4% and the inflation rate is 5.4%, that's still effectively zero.
Right.
And you don't have the incentive, to keep on, buying houses, or you don't have the incentive to keep on blowing up the stock market. Whereas the way that we're doing it now, of course, does precisely that.
Right. So you talk about the role of stability with the ZRPR.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you, what do you think the role of speculation might play in this debate?
Well, that's the point. I mean, if you think about it, what is financial speculation? Typically, it's a bet. If I can put it simply, when interest rates are low, asset prices go up, whether those asset prices are deserved or not. You can just see it in the housing market. Interest rates are low, and the price of houses goes through the roof. That's kind of ridiculous. The price of houses goes through the roof. But you see what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And of course, it doesn't to a financial speculator. It doesn't matter which way it goes. Actually, it could go the other way too. There could be deflation. So interest rates goes up and asset prices fall. Well, so you just sell short.
Yeah.
So the instability in this real rate of interest, I think the mistake that a lot of people make is that when they talk about financial markets, they focus just on, what we call the nominal interest rate and the nominal asset price. I think I said to you a couple of days ago when we were having a chat, I said, my house might be, I don't know, $1.5 million now, right? Which sounds good. But suppose at the same time your cup of coffee was going to cost you $1 million. Right? It wouldn't, I'm happy because, to put it bluntly, my house has gone up more than the cup of coffee. So I think what's wrong is this focus on just the dollar figures, whether it be, 1 million or 2 million or whatever. It is true that there's an inverse relationship between real interest rates, between interest rates and asset prices. But what's important is the real, how much your 1.5 million can buy you, right, in terms of goods and services, or how much you're actually paying out of your income for interest rates. As I say, if the real rate is negative, they're actually paying you to borrow, not vice versa. And that's what leads to stability. So my view is that if you try to stabilize the ZRPR, the zero real policy rate, at zero, you understand, I think that would actually constitute a fair distribution of income as well. Again, we would have to go into some details about what do we mean by fairness and who gets what and all that kind of thing. But I think part of the reason I talk about zero is I do think that would be a fair distribution of income. There are analogies there to things like Islamic banking, for example, where interest per se is not regarded as a legitimate income, right? Whereas profits and wages are, regarded as legitimate income. It's not just confined, to Islam. Other religious traditions have had the same thing. In Catholicism, there were usury laws and so forth. All we're really saying is that those prescriptions, those concepts about fairness, should be argued in real terms, as opposed to nominal terms. If they're argued in nominal terms, they will not, in fact, be fair. That's the point. Two things. I argue, and I have argued, that the zero interest rate policy will conduce to instability of the type we've talked about, and cause all those bad consequences about inflation, and and it could go the other way. For example, if inflation, if people suddenly start to panic and aren't willing to spend any more money, it could go in the opposite direction. You could get a Great Depression equally well, and in fact, you did in the 1930s. At the same time, I argue that that policy conduces to fairness. Again, different people are going to differ about what's fair and what isn't fair, and so on and so forth. But my objection to the zero interest rate policy per se is it achieves neither of those objectives. It achieves neither stability nor, in my view, fairness. Whereas the other one, it's not going to solve every problem in the world, for sure. But it conduces to stability and fairness. I can't judge whether I'm explaining this well or not, but has it made sense?
Yeah, I think it's well put there, John. That's kind of runs through all the questions that I had today. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the discussion. Thank you so much.
I enjoy talking about this stuff. Thank you, Daniel, and I hope we're going to meet again at some future stage. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, John. I'm sure we will. Take care.
Right. Now I have to stop recording now. That's the next thing, which I will do.